The next thing that we're going to do once we have gone through resizing and resampling, so we figured out what the biggest image that we can safely make from this file is. But what if we need to make it bigger than that, right? Often the case, it's like, oh, I need to make this show print. It needs to be 30 by 40 for whatever weird egomaniacal reason. I do that and my resolution is too low. What can I do about it? So let's go ahead and take a look at that here. Remember, we were able to get this to, oops, look, didn't have that proportion thing checked. We were able to get it to 11 by 17. Goodness gracious. 11 by 17 with resample unchecked. Remember, keep an eye on that. Even I am not paying attention. And that was fine, right, because it was 200 and something. We could go to 13 by 19, right? That's still right at 180, basically. That would be fine. But what if, dear readers, I had to do this 30 inches by 45 inches? I look at that and, oh man, my resolution is super low. It's way down there at 77 pixels per inch. Now, if I just leave this here, I can print it out and it's going to look kind of blotchy and not great, right? It's going to look fine on my screen, right? I'll hit OK, right? It looks exactly the same, right? Because my screen, it hasn't gotten any bigger or any smaller. When I print it out now on this giant piece of paper though, right, it's going to look kind of blotchy and crummy. So what are we going to do about that? Well, all the solutions that I'm going to go through are imperfect. Really, what you want to do is go back in time and shoot with a higher resolution camera, or don't print it so goddamn big. Why are you printing it so big? Who do you think you are? Come on. So I'm going to go ahead and click resample, and then I can now put in a resolution, and Photoshop will make up pixels, stuff them in there until it has enough pixels per inch to be whatever resolution I input. I'm going to go ahead and put in 300. Putting in like 700 or 1,000 or a jillion, right, is not going to make it any better, right? We can't really see anything higher than 300 anyway. So I've put in 300. That's going to make my file pretty big, but that's probably the most you would want to do, right? You could do 180 and that would be probably still fine. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Go get a sandwich while Photoshop spins its wheels a little bit. Good. That was a good sandwich. All right, so we're back here. If I zoom all the way into 100%, I can see a little bit of blotchiness in here. It's not great, right? You can see the eyebrows don't look super crisp the way that they might have previously. Not great, not totally terrible. If we were to print it, it would look sort of squishier than it looks on our screen. So what are we going to do about it? I'm going to do two things. One is grain, right? Remember when we had a file that we retouched a lot and it was super blurry? We used grain to kind of sharpen it back up. The other thing that we're going to look at a little bit is sharpening. Grain, remember that's a non-destructive edit. You have a grain layer, you can throw it away, right? That's cool. Sharpening is usually a destructive edit. Usually if I apply sharpening, it's to a flattened file and there's nothing I can do about it. Here we'll do a technique to do sharpening to a file that is undoable. It's still kind of a pain and it's still something you should do at the very end of your editing process before you send it to print, right? When you're all ready to go, you can do that. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and grab those three layers here in my layers palette, come up to my hamburger menu, click on that and say convert to smart object. Those three layers now, zoop, will become a single layer. And a smart object is basically a package of all of those layers that Photoshop can then treat as if it's a flattened layer. So now I can go ahead up to Filter and go to Sharpen. I'm going to go to Unsharp Mask. You could also do Smart Sharpen. So here we go. I'm going to click on something so that I have something in my preview window here that is actually visible. And we have these three settings. Amount makes sense, right? From 1 to 500. Let's move that down a little bit. Radius and threshold are a little bit more unclear. What do those mean? So the way that an Unsharp mask works is that it tries to identify edges in a scene, and then it increases the contrast at those edges. How does that work? Why would that make an image look sharper? If you imagine a cannonball in a field of snow, and if I've used this metaphor for you in the past, sorry. Cannonball in a field of snow, if I take a picture of it that is out of focus, right? It's like snow, 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 light gray, dark gray, darker gray, darker gray, black, right? That's sort of what we see visually because we're totally out of focus. The cannonball is a big fuzzy mess that gradually goes from black in the center through shades of gray to the white of the snow. If I'm in focus, right, it's like white snow, white snow, white snow, white snow, white snow, bang, right? Like hard edge, black cannonball. So if I have a more in focus, sharper image, it is going to have harder edges, edges that are more contrasting, right? It's going to be one thing on one side of the edge, a different thing on the other side of the edge. So Unsharp Mask works along those principles where it tries to identify an edge and then increase the contrast at that edge. So threshold is a control for saying, okay, how big of a difference do we need between pixel A and pixel B before we decide that's an edge, right? If my threshold is 255, only if it's absolutely black and absolutely white will it say that they're different. If my threshold is super low, then any little teeny tiny difference will be identified as an edge and it will increase the contrast there. Radius is how far out from that edge do I increase the contrast. All right, so if I have a very big radius, right, every time it identifies an edge, it's going to increase the contrast a whole lot from that edge, right? Not just right at the edge, but all the way around it. And then amount, of course, is how much of an increase in contrast there is. So if I turn the amount all the way up to 500 and my radius is 155 pixels, right, 1,000 pixels, essentially what I've done is increase the contrast across the entire image, right? Because it's like, okay, you know, I'm just going out from anything that I think is an edge. I found something I think is an edge, boom, expanded out across the entire image. Super contrasty. That obviously is stupid. Don't do it. What we can do, let's pull this down a little bit. We can set our threshold a little higher, right? So it's going to be less likely to find an edge that is just a subtle difference. And then I can bring my amount up and I can start playing with that radius, right? And I've got preview turned on. I can turn that on and off. And as I do that, you can see, right, she's got pretty smooth skin tone, but in those areas where there is a significant difference, there is some increased contrast going on. So if I look, for example, at the fold of the eye, I am getting an increase in contrast there if I turn my preview on and off. You may need to do this in your own file. I'm not sure if the quality will be visible in the video. Same thing with the catch light in the eye, these other sort of specular highlights, and also, right, sort of skin texture, same thing, that gets heightened, sort of crackliness in the hair, that gets heightened, right, eyebrows, right, they're sort of contrasty, that gets heightened. So that's what sharpening does. It's kind of a blunt tool. Probably turn it down a little bit, turn this down a little bit, and have a relatively lower radius. So we can use it, and that's okay, right? So I've got my threshold is pretty low, my radius is not super big, and if I click that on and off, I'm just getting a little bit more pop, a little bit more contrast on the eyebrows, on the eye, on like the edges of the nostrils, all that good stuff. So there we go. I can hit OK. It applies that unsharp mask to the image. By the way, I'm doing this zoomed in to 100%. If you were zoomed out, you're not actually able to see what it's doing, and all of this is pointless. So make sure that you're zoomed in to 100%. I can hit Z on the keyboard and then hit 100% right there. So because we made it a smart object, right here we have our smart filters, unsharp mask. I can undo that or turn it back on. Right? Every time I do that, it is going to take a little processing power. Or if I go ahead and double click on it, I can go back in and edit those settings. So this is really great compared to flattening our image and doing it, because this way we can make a print, evaluate it, because that's going to be the important thing. Like, what does it look like on the actual print rather than our screen? Evaluate it and then come back in and make an adjustment, rather than having to redo the whole thing and try to remember what our settings were. Next thing I'm going to do is grain, right? This should be review. We've done this a couple of times. So I'm going to go layer, new layer. I'm going to call it grain because I do not want to fail the class. Mode, overlay, fill with overlay neutral color. Yes, please. And then filter, noise, add noise, monochromatic, Gaussian, and you can sort of set an amount. Now, the reason that I don't do this before sharpening is that what does grain do, right? It makes a whole bunch of little speckles. Sharpening would see all of those as a bunch of edges, and it would just boost the contrast through the roof. So order of what we do here is important. We want to do that smart sharpening first, right, to that smart object, and then add our grain on top of that. So that grain in there is going to take an image which might be a little mushy, and it's going to give it the appearance of being higher resolution and just perhaps slightly higher ISO, right? So it's going to look a little bit more like speckly noise rather than mushy enlarged pixels. So those are two strategies for dealing with an image that you have to blow up a whole lot. You may or may not need that for the Project 3 assignment. It will kind of depend on what your camera is and how big your print is, but you will definitely need these techniques at a later point in your career. So practice them, file them away, remember that they exist, email me when you're doing your senior show, and hopefully they will help you out. And that's it. I think I'm going to save the next 2 bits for the next clip. Go ahead and do that smart filter and unsharp mask and grain, screenshot it, and that we will put we'll put that on the Padlet, and then we're also going to be saving these screenshots and turning them in along with a couple of other things. So don't toss them.